Imagine being a great king, ruling over vast lands with wisdom and strength, beloved by your people and feared by your enemies. Now, imagine willingly accepting a gift that would preserve your power forever, only to discover too late that you've traded your very soul for an eternity of servitude and shadow. This is the horrifying reality that befell 9 of the greatest rulers in Middle-earth's history. They were once men of renown, mighty kings who commanded armies, sorcerer lords who wielded ancient magic, and noble champions who defended their people against all threats. But in their hunger for greater power and their fear of mortality, they accepted 9 rings that seemed like divine gifts, but were actually instruments of the most insidious corruption ever devised. These rings transformed them from protectors into predators, from rulers into slaves, and from men into something far more terrifying than death itself. In the vast mythology of Middle-earth, few figures inspire as much terror and fascination as the 9 Nazgûl, also known as the Ring Wraiths or the Black Riders. These spectral beings, once proud kings and sorcerers of men, represent one of the most tragic falls from grace in all of Tolkien's writings. Their story is one of ambition, corruption, and the ultimate price of seeking power beyond mortal ken. To understand the Nazgul, we must first comprehend the nature of their corruption. In the great halls of Ostin Edhill, the elven smiths of Eregion, led by Celebrimbor, forged the rings of power under the guidance of one who called himself Anatar, the Lord of Gifts. Unknown to them, this fair-seeming being was Sauron in disguise, and while the elves created the rings, he secretly forged the one ring to command them all. Among the rings of power were 9 given to mortal men, who above all else desired power and dominion. These rings granted their bearers great abilities. They could command respect and fear, amass wealth beyond measure, and extend their natural lifespans far beyond mortal limits. But the rings came with a terrible price, for they were bound to the One Ring, and through it, to Sauron's will. The rings did not immediately corrupt their bearers. At first, they seemed like magnificent gifts, enhancing the natural abilities and ambitions of their wearers. The 9 men who received these rings were already kings, sorcerers, and great lords of their respective peoples. They were not chosen at random, but were selected precisely because of their existing power and influence, making them valuable servants for the Dark Lord's purposes. The transformation from mortal king to undead wraith was gradual and insidious. Tolkien describes this process as a slow fading, where the ring bearers became increasingly dependent on their rings, while simultaneously being drawn under the dominion of the One Ring and its master. The rings preserved their bodies for a time, granting them extended life, but this preservation came at the cost of their humanity. As the centuries passed, the 9 became more and more removed from the physical world. Their bodies became invisible to mortal eyes, existing in a twilight realm between the seen and unseen. They could no longer enjoy the simple pleasures of mortal life. Food had no taste, warmth brought no comfort, and the beauty of the world faded to grey shadows. They existed in a state of perpetual hunger and cold, sustained only by their service to Sauron and the terrible power of their rings. The rings bound them not just to Sauron but to existence itself, in a twisted form of immortality. They could not die, but neither could they truly live. Their wills became enslaved to the Dark Lord, their every thought and action directed by his malevolent purpose. They retained their intelligence and cunning, making them formidable servants, but they had lost their free will and their humanity. Of the 9, the most prominent and powerful was their leader, known as the Witch-king of Angmar or the Lord of the Nazgul. While Tolkien never explicitly reveals his mortal identity, various clues throughout the texts suggest he was once a great king or sorcerer lord from the ancient days of Middle-earth. Some scholars of Tolkien's work have speculated that he might have been one of the Númenórean lords who fell to corruption, given his evident knowledge of ancient sorcery and his commanding presence among the Nine. The Witch-king established the realm of Angmar in the north of Middle-earth, from where he waged war against the successor kingdoms of Arnor for nearly 7 centuries. His campaigns were methodical and devastating, using not only military might but also plague, terror, and dark sorcery to weaken his enemies. The kingdom of Cardolan fell to a great plague sent by the Witch-king, and the royal line of Fornost was broken by his armies. His power was such that no mortal man could stand against him in single combat, a fact that would prove significant in the final days of the Third Age. He commanded not only the other Nazgûl, but also vast armies of orcs, trolls, and corrupted men. His very presence on the battlefield could turn the tide of war, as horses would not suffer his approach, and men's hearts would fail them at his coming. The Witch-king's knowledge of ancient lore and dark magic made him particularly valuable to Sauron. He could read the ancient tongues, command fell beasts, and work sorceries that few others could comprehend. His understanding of the spiritual realm allowed him to track the ring-bearer across great distances and pierce veils that would hide others from mortal sight. Before we continue exploring the other members of this terrifying fellowship, please like and subscribe. A simple click means everything to the channel. Your support helps us delve deeper into the rich lore of Middle-earth and bring you more content about the characters and stories that make Tolkien's world so endlessly fascinating. Among the Nine, Khamûl is the only other Nazgûl whose name Tolkien provides. Known as the Shadow of the East, Khamûl was said to be an Easterling lord who ruled over peoples beyond the Sea of Rhûn. In life, he was likely a king or high chieftain of one of the many tribes and kingdoms that dwelt in the vast lands east of Mordor and Rhovanion. Khamûl's origins among the Easterlings made him particularly valuable to Sauron in commanding the allegiance of the Eastern peoples. His knowledge of their customs, languages, and ways of war allowed the Dark Lord to maintain control over vast territories that might otherwise have required constant military oversight. Through Khamûl, Sauron could communicate with and command the Varrics of Khand, the numerous tribes of Rhûn, and other Eastern peoples who served the Shadow. The Eastern origin of Khamûl also suggests that the corruption of the Nine was not limited to the western lands of Middle-earth. The rings were distributed widely, ensuring that Sauron's influence could reach into all corners of the world. This geographic distribution of the Nine made them effective agents for maintaining the Dark Lord's power across his vast domain. Several of the other Nazgûl are thought to have been Eastern or Southern lords, based on references in Tolkien's writings to their command over the Easterlings and Southrons. These lords would have been powerful kings or sorcerer princes in their own right, ruling over civilizations that were ancient even by the standards of Middle-earth. Their fall to the power of the rings represents the corruption of entire cultures and peoples, not merely individuals. Among the Nine, there were also lords from the south, possibly including kings of Harad or other southern realms. These men would have ruled over the vast desert kingdoms south of Gondor and Mordor, commanding armies of Mumakil riders and fierce warriors adapted to the harsh climates of their homeland. Their corruption brought entire southern nations under Sauron's influence, providing him with the manpower and resources needed to wage war against the free peoples of the north. Some Tolkien scholars have suggested that one or more of the Nine may have been corrupted Númenórean lords, either from Númenor itself before its fall, or from the realms in exile. The power and longevity that would have made such lords attractive to Sauron, combined with their knowledge of ancient lore and their natural authority over other men, would have made them valuable servants indeed. If Númenóreans were among the Nine, their corruption represents a particularly tragic fall, as the Númenóreans were blessed by the valor with extended lifespans, great wisdom, and noble purposes. Their transformation into wraiths would symbolize the ultimate perversion of these gifts, turning wisdom into cunning malice, and extending their lives only to serve eternal darkness. The presence of Númenórean blood among the Nazgûl would also explain their particular effectiveness against the Dúnedain, the descendants of Númenor, who established the kingdoms of Arnor and Gondor. The Witch-king's successful campaign against Arnor, and the fear that all the Nine inspired in the Rangers of the North, suggests an intimate knowledge of Númenórean strengths and weaknesses. Among the Nine were also great sorcerers and practitioners of ancient magic from the early days of Middle-earth. These were men who had delved deep into forbidden lore, seeking power through knowledge of the unseen world. Their existing mastery of magical arts made them particularly susceptible to the allure of the rings, which promised to amplify their abilities beyond imagination. These sorcerer lords likely came from various cultures and periods, representing different traditions of magical learning. Some may have been pupils of the Blue Wizards who ventured into the East, while others might have developed their arts independently or learned from darker sources. Their corruption by the rings transformed their pursuit of knowledge into a hunger for domination, and their magical abilities into tools of terror and oppression. The magical knowledge retained by these Nazgûl made them invaluable to Sauron's plans. They could work great sorceries, create and command fell creatures, and perceive things hidden from ordinary sight. Their understanding of the spiritual realm allowed them to track the ring across vast distances and penetrate disguises and concealments that would fool mortal senses. These sorcerer Nazgûl were also instrumental in maintaining Sauron's power during his periods of physical weakness. When the Dark Lord's body was destroyed, it was the Nine who helped maintain his influence over his domain and who worked to prepare for his return. Their magical abilities allowed them to serve as extensions of his will, even when he could not act directly in the physical world. Several of the Nine were likely kings of ancient realms that have been lost to history, their very names forgotten, save in the oldest chronicles. These were rulers of kingdoms that flourished in the Second Age, when the power of men was growing and great cities were being built across Middle-earth. The rings offered these kings the promise of eternal rule, the ability to see their realms prosper forever under their wise guidance. The irony of their fate is profound. In seeking to preserve their kingdoms eternally, they became the instruments of their destruction. Their realms fell to ruin as their immortal kings were drawn into shadow, their subjects either scattered or corrupted into service of the Dark Lord. The great cities they had built became haunted ruins, their treasures claimed by Sauron or lost to time. These ancient kings brought to the Nine a deep understanding of statecraft, military strategy, and the governance of men. Their knowledge proved invaluable to Sauron in organizing his vast empire and in corrupting other kingdoms to his service. They understood the weaknesses and desires of mortal rulers, making them effective agents for spreading the Shadow's influence through diplomacy and intrigue, as well as through open warfare. The transformation of these kings from protectors of their people to servants of their greatest enemy represents one of the most tragic aspects of the Nazgûl story. They had once been heroes to their subjects, wise rulers who brought prosperity and security to their realms. Their corruption turned them into figures of terror, hunting the very people they had once sworn to protect. Among the Nine were also great warriors and champions, men who had won renown in battle and commanded the respect of their peoples through strength of arms. These were heroes who had defended their lands against monsters and invaders, who had led armies to victory and inspired courage in their followers. The rings appealed to their desire to become unconquerable in battle, to protect their people forever from all threats. These warrior Nazgûl retained their martial skills, even in their transformed state, becoming deadly opponents who combined mortal cunning with supernatural power. They could not be killed by ordinary weapons, could inspire terror in their enemies with their very presence, and commanded an intimate knowledge of warfare that spanned centuries of experience. Their understanding of military tactics and strategy made them effective commanders of Sauron's armies. The corruption of these champions represents the perversion of the warrior's code, the transformation of protectors into predators. Where once they had fought to defend the innocent, they now brought terror and death to those they encountered. Their strength, once used to shield the weak, became a tool for oppression and conquest. The warrior Nazgûl were particularly effective against the martial cultures of Middle-earth, as they understood the psychology of warriors and could exploit the codes of honor and courage that guided their enemies. They knew how to demoralize opposing forces and could recognize and counter the tactics of mortal commanders who might think themselves clever. The ultimate tragedy of the Nine lies not just in their individual corruption, but in their complete subjugation to Sauron's will. The rings that had once seemed to grant them power beyond mortal limits became chains that bound them to eternal servitude. They retained their memories and much of their knowledge, but their ability to act independently was completely destroyed. This binding was not merely magical, but spiritual, affecting the very essence of their being. They could not conceive of acting against Sauron's interests, or finding joy in anything that did not serve his purposes. Their former loves and loyalties were not forgotten, but transformed, becoming sources of pain rather than comfort. They remembered their former lives, but experienced them as distant dreams, forever beyond their reach. The Nine served not out of loyalty or fear, but because they literally could not do otherwise. Their wills had been subsumed into Sauron's own, making them extensions of his consciousness, rather than independent beings. This complete domination made them absolutely reliable servants, but also emphasized the horror of their fate. They were aware of their condition, but powerless to change it. The binding also made them dependent on Sauron's power for their continued existence. When the One Ring was destroyed and Sauron's power broken, the Nine were released from their torment, but this release came only through their complete destruction. They could not return to life or find peace until the source of their corruption was eliminated. During the War of the Ring, the Nine served as Sauron's most trusted agents, leading the search for the ring and commanding his armies in battle. The Witch-king led the assault on Minas Tirith, breaking the gates of the city and nearly achieving victory before the arrival of the Rohirrim. The other Nazgûl spread terror throughout Gondor and Rohan, their very presence demoralizing defenders and inspiring despair among the free peoples. The Nine's knowledge of the ring and its power made them uniquely effective hunters. They could sense its presence across great distances and were drawn to it like iron to a lodestone. Their pursuit of Frodo and the Fellowship across Middle-earth demonstrated both their relentless determination and their strategic intelligence. They adapted their tactics as needed, using different approaches to track their quarry, and nearly succeeding on several occasions. Their role in the war also highlighted their strategic importance to Sauron's plans. They were not merely powerful servants, but key commanders who could coordinate complex military operations across vast distances. Their ability to command both human armies and orcish hordes made them invaluable in managing Sauron's diverse forces and maintaining discipline among troops who might otherwise be difficult to control. The destruction of the Nine came not through conventional warfare, but through the destruction of the source of their power. When Frodo cast the One Ring into the fires of Mount Doom, the 9 rings lost their potency, and the Nazgûl were finally released from their torment. Their destruction was described as a great crying in the wind, suggesting that their ending brought not triumph, but a kind of tragic relief. The story of the 9 Nazgûl serves as one of Tolkien's most powerful warnings about the corrupting nature of power and the danger of seeking dominion over others. Each of the 9 began as a figure of authority and respect in their respective societies, but their desire for greater power led them to accept gifts that seemed beneficial but were ultimately destructive. Their transformation illustrates Tolkien's belief that power, particularly power over others, inevitably corrupts those who wield it. The rings promise to enhance their natural abilities and extend their influence, but in doing so, they gradually stripped away their humanity until nothing remained but hunger and servitude. The very power they sought to preserve their kingdoms and protect their people became the instrument of their destruction. The 9 also represent the universality of this corruption. They came from different cultures, different lands, and different periods, showing that no people or civilization is immune to the temptation of power. Whether Eastern or Western, Northern or Southern, sorcerer or warrior, king or champion, all were equally susceptible to the ring's influence. Their story serves as a counterpoint to the heroism displayed by characters like Frodo, Aragorn, and Gandalf, who either rejected power when it was offered or wielded it with restraint and self-sacrifice. The contrast emphasizes that heroism lies not in the acquisition of power, but in its proper use or deliberate rejection when it would cause harm. The 9 Nazgûl stand as among the most memorable and terrifying creations in all of fantasy literature, but their horror lies not merely in their supernatural abilities or fearsome appearance. Rather, it stems from the recognition that they were once men much like ourselves, with hopes and dreams, responsibilities, and loved ones. Their fall serves as a warning about the seductive nature of power and the price of ambition, unchecked by wisdom and humility. In their spectral forms, forever hungry and cold, forever serving a master they cannot resist, the 9 embody the ultimate futility of seeking power for its own sake. They achieved a form of immortality, but at the cost of everything that made their eternal existence worthwhile. They gained dominion over others, but lost dominion over themselves. Their story reminds us that true strength lies not in commanding others, but in commanding ourselves, not in extending our reach, but in understanding our limits, and not in grasping for immortality, but in making our mortal lives meaningful and good. The 9 Nazgûl, in their tragic fall and ultimate destruction, illuminate by contrast the nobility of those who choose a different path, who serve rather than dominate, who sacrifice rather than grasp, and who find in their mortality not a limitation, but a call to courage and compassion. Through their tale, Tolkien created not merely antagonists for his heroes to overcome, but a profound meditation on the nature of power, corruption, and redemption. The 9 serve as eternal warnings, spectral reminders of what we might become if we choose dominion over service, power over love, and the shadow over the light. But what do you think? Which of the 9 do you find most terrifying, and why? Do you believe any of them could have resisted the corruption of their rings if they had understood the true cost? And perhaps most intriguingly, if you had been offered one of the 9 rings in your moment of greatest need or ambition, do you honestly believe you would have had the wisdom to refuse? The tragedy of the Nazgûl is that they were not evil men who sought corruption, but powerful leaders who believed they were making choices that would benefit their people and preserve their legacies. Were they victims of Sauron's deception, Or did their own pride and ambition make them willing participants in their downfall? Share your thoughts in the comments below, and let's explore together the complex morality that makes Tolkien's villains so compelling and terrifying. Until next time, this is Fellowship of the Lore, reminding you that even in the darkest shadows, the light of wisdom can guide us home.